In the name of God, the most benevolent and the most merciful, in honor of the original unconditional moment that all conditions have arisen from and will return, in honor of the world host and the original against power, this reality, this simulation. Hey everyone, welcome to another lecture. I tried giving this lecture yesterday. Excuse me. Sorry about that, guys, to begin. So in today's lecture, I would like to talk about the topic. I tried giving this yesterday, but my headphones didn't work. I mean, the battery was pretty low. I hadn't calculated, and I also got an insight about the lecture that sometimes procrastination could be due to, I guess, technical difficulties, you know. But in this lecture, I would like to talk about how procrastination is a hidden sign you're bored with life. And as someone who has retaliated against his boredom his whole life, you know, I have observed this topic and I have had different engagements with the concept of procrastination in different areas of my life. Some areas of my life I have procrastinated, other areas of my life I have not. And this lecture is, I will share how so. When I give these lectures, folks, yeah, okay. Sorry, guys, I'm going to double check if it's being recorded. I'll be right back. Okay, the audio seems to be fine. Let me know if it needs to be adjusted, folks. So, in giving these lectures, I tend to have an approach that if we are to fully engage an idea, a concept, or topic, we must become aware of its context through how we are designed to experience reality in this era, which is through a sense of past, present, and future. So anything you look at, you can wonder about how it has a value based on the past, how it has a value based on the present, and how it has a value based on what it could be, you know. And the cause of this value, for example, through Aristotle's view, a sort of causal value, there's multiple reasons, even based on not just time, but how something is meant to be used, you know. But I'm going to go through these views. Now, I've provided a research component to look at it from the past. I'm going to share with you my views on the present, and the only thing would be left to speak about really is what this would mean in the future. Yeah. Okay, this was on mute. So, procrastination, that you're bored with life. So, research component, and then I'll share my. I have examples from my own life to share. All right. So this is the research component from ChatGPT 5.2. The purpose of the research component is the purpose of the research component. Excuse me. The purpose of the research component is to show different perspectives on the topic. Okay, let's read it. ChatGPT 5.2. This academic view. In academic psychology, procrastination is most common excuse me, is most commonly defined as the procrastination is most commonly defined as the delay of an intended action despite anticipating it will be harmful. Historically, it was treated as a time management problem, but modern research frames it more precisely as a self-regulation problem, especially emotion regulation. In this view, people procrastinate less because they, in quotations, can't manage time, and more because they're managing feelings, anxiety, uncertainty, frustration, shame, boredom, or fear of inadequacy. I'm going to pause it here, guys, and say something. See, it's saying that you as a human being, consider yourself, you have a certain range of attention. Your brain is a couple pounds, it gives you a certain processing power, and in some sense, when a person is occupied by anxiety, uncertainty, frustration, shame, boredom, or fear, or inadequacy, these are about a sense of incompleteness within the internal realm, within the inner realms of that human being, within their inner life. So it means that in some sense, what is going on behind your eyes is taking your attention when that attention needs to go to the task at hand. Okay, and this could be even because of fear, guys. Here it says fear of inadequacy. I'm going to keep reading. It says a large body of work links procrastination to temporal discounting, in brackets, present emotional relief of avoidance outweighs future rewards. I'm going to pause here. What this is saying is that you feel emotion, how it feels now, is in some sense in your mind. Let's say it's like how you feel now is more important than how you will feel if you don't procrastinate and go do the task, right? So there's a sort of I think ignorance with that. That in some sense we can avoid our future greatness just because. And then it says, so I'm going to read that again. Large body of work links procrastination, temporal discounting. The present emotional relief of avoidance outweighs future reward. Executive functioning limits, in brackets, planning, inhibition, task initiation, and perfectionism, where starting feels dangerous because it risks proving one's limit. That's very. Okay, guys, let me know if the audio is better this way. Anyways, I'm going to keep reading. It says, yet existential and motivational scholarship adds an important layer. Chronic procrastination can reflect a deeper disengagement from meaning, identity, and vitality. Self determination theory suggests intrinsic Motive, excuse me. Self-determination theory suggests intrinsic motivation depends on autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When daily tasks do not satisfy these needs, motivation collapses and avoidance rises. So, just to pause here, this sentence is saying that if you don't feel autonomous like yourself, if you don't feel competent like you're capable in something, and relatedness means it's not real for you, then you don't have a motivation for it. Okay, and sometimes in order to have motivation, like my personal view is that when something, this is what I wanted to share then, but I'll say it now, like I wanted to share that in regards to importance in my life, the things that were important to me, it's like they were more real. Okay, and they were important because I could do something about it. Do you know? And I felt that it was like my identity was not being reduced by the task but being amplified by the task. You know, it says in parallel, existential psychology treats boredom not as simple idleness, but as a signal that the person's current life structure is no longer producing significance, growth, or purpose. From this combined perspective, procrastination can sometimes function as an unconscious protest against living in a way that feels misaligned with one's values or desired self. All procrastination equals boredom with life, but it supports a strong claim when procrastination becomes global, persistent, and emotionally flat, it often indicates an underlying motivational vacuum, a life narrative that no longer feels compelling enough to energize action. I'm going to just pause here, guys. When it says a life narrative that no longer feels compelling enough to energize action, it means that you are bored with the story you're telling yourself. And the story you're telling yourself, it is not important to you. So you delay things until necessary to act. Do you know? I found it in my when I was in during my schooling days. I did not care about like information processing and knowledge and systems theory and all of this. When I was in school, I was one of those kids who would leave it to the last moment. You know, and I realized there's some people who they start planning and preparing, they start studying for the exam like months ahead, little by little, rather than like, piling it up all up for the end, right? But because when I was in the classroom, I was, of course, very shy and introverted, but aside from that, um, I did not feel valuable except in one class, which was my calculus class, like in high school, right? Which I got like, above 90 something, right? And it was only that which I really cared for, So it's very important that if you don't value something, okay, you're not going to care to act on it, right? And it happens with everything, whether it's objects, subjects, whether it's people, do you know? And identity is very important. Of course, in these talks of mine, I am more drawn to what happens before the identity emerges, right? But identity is very key because all of us function to some degree in this modern era through narrative. That means like before I realize I'm truly an unknown being in an unknown world and everything is a storytelling operation, right? I was under the impression I was allowing the idea of me to own me all the time, and it was based on that narrative. So we look at human beings now and we're like, yo, this is a natural biological human organism, generated in nature, right? And now, even though we have this ancient outdated biological technology, right, but we're living in unnatural circumstances of our own creation, right? We have created a civilization that is more unnatural and more focused on one capability of confidence of the individual, which is its analytical capability. Okay. So What I'm trying to say here is that your self narrative is very key. And if you're bored with life, okay, excuse me, if you see you're procrastinating, is because that sense of self, that character that's been written up for you in your mind of you, is not in the proper story. That means I kind of want to say it this way, that you're bored with your own story. Okay, you're bored with your own story, and it causes you procrastination because you don't care, right? This has happened to me personally so many occasions. For example, I've cared about giving these lectures throughout my life, but I didn't care, like, to try to get married early, have kids. I don't know why that wasn't that real to me. Do you know what I mean? And it didn't even the sense of, I couldn't even fathom that sense of autonomy. Now I can, right? But at the time in my 20s, I couldn't. And I would say, I would recommend to all humans on this earth, get married in your mid 20s. you know People are going to be like, no man, you fool. I'm telling you, you don't want to be too old for your kids, yo. Anyways, let's go back to it. There's more to read. So the research component is saying a life narrative that no longer feels compelling enough to energize action. Now, I just copy pasted my title in ChatGPT and asked it to give an academic and advanced view. It says, for new living in academic terms would mean redesigning goals, routines, environments, and identity commitments so that action becomes emotionally meaningful rather than externally forced. So if you're procrastinating, you gotta, in some sense, redesign your self narrative. Okay, but that's to be able to redesign that self narrative. You don't want to just do it based on your personal inner life, but you got to kind of ground yourself with what is impersonal and what is outside of you. Do you know? That means sometimes a person may procrastinate just because they're like, yo man, I don't feel I can do this, right? But how do they know? They don't know if they can do it in the outer realms, right? A lot of us assume that we're weak without realizing what our potential could be. If you don't know your potential, how can you be weak? If you don't know your potential, how can you be, like, do you know what I mean? If you don't know your potential for how good you could be, like, why treat yourself as bad? Do you know what I mean? Somebody could make the counter argument true. Why treat yourself good if in some sense, you don't know your potential for bad, right? And really, the situation with human beings, guys, this is me saying this, the situation with us human beings is all about a sort of parallel reality management. What does that mean? That means the way reality comes across to us behind our eyes is very different than what it actually is in front of our eyes. In front of our eyes, it is devoid of the subjective meaning that our nature imbues it. So a lot of things are, let's say, meaningless in the individual human experience, and when they've found in that consciousness, we are that agency that gives meaning to form. Okay. It says procrastination is often emotion avoidance, not laziness. When it becomes chronic and widespread, it can reflect low meaning, low autonomy, and identity misalignment. Basically, life stops feeling, in quotations, worth moving for, so the brain delays. Guys, I want to share something. I saw this video. I don't know what the channel was, but there was this guy calling into this, like, talk show, YouTube talk show, and there was this, like, host of the show answering the questions. And this husband called in and he's like, yo man, I'm living like a normal life. I got kids, I got a wife, I got a mortgage, and the husband was saying that I'm kind of not physically out of like maintaining my life, but I'm mentally out of like, on a mind level, not kind of out of it, of like, maintaining his life, right? And he was saying that like when I, for example, do something, my wife comes and recorrects me, and it's like, in many cases, and the husband was saying like, it's like I don't feel like I'm good enough anymore, right? And honestly, the host, if I remember correctly, the host in the video was so smart. I wish I knew his name. The host in the video was so smart, and he says, who told you you're not good enough? Okay. And it was a very important, like, that video was very important to me because it kind of showed that if a person doesn't feel valued, or they don't even feel like their value will increase, their motivation decreases, you know unless you're a bit strange like me, and your value is, I mean, I guess this talk is the reason I give these talks. I've been giving them for so long is because they have an innate inner value. For me, the motivation is beyond like human value. The motivation is what is valuable for the species. For me, if you've listened to my talks, you'll know that it's all about the advancement of civilization, to usher in the advanced humanity, to realize that it's about increasing the responsibility levels of the human being, not just the expansion of the horizons of one's awareness, but being able to engage what you find in that expansion of awareness. So now we go to the most advanced view. ChatGPT says 5.2 says, I'm reading this. From the lens of an advanced civilization that has deeply mapped human motivation, procrastination would be treated as a diagnostic signal about the quality of a person's life design. Such a civilization would not frame humans as, in quotations, workers who must force productivity, but as evolving cognitive systems whose energy naturally flows towards experiences that expand agency, meaning, mastery, and connection. In that model, procrastination is what appears when the mind detects that current actions no longer justify the metabolic and psychological investment of effort. It is the nervous system's quiet refusal to spend life energy on routines that do not produce growth, narrative momentum, or existential upgrade. The future advanced interpretation is that many modern humans live inside, in quotations, legacy realities, inherited schedules, outdated identities, repetitive environments, and social scripts designed for survival rather than expansion. Procrastination becomes the symptom of a being trapped in a life that is technically functional but spiritually understimulating, where the person's inner potential outruns their lived environment. In quotations, new living would not mean superficial habit changes. It would mean a full recalibration of the person's ecosystem, the social tribe, the mission, the difficulty level of daily challenges, the aesthetic environment, the learning curve, and the meaning dash feedback loops that make effort worthwhile. In this view, boredom is not a character flaw, it is intelligence detecting stagnation. Procrastination is the data point showing that the current version of life has what an incredible way to say it. and that the self requires a more advanced narrative, one that reawakens urgency because it reawakens purpose. It says procrastination is your life energy refusing to invest in an outdated life design. It's not just, in quotation, bad habits. It's a signal that your current routine isn't producing growth, meaning, or upgrade. So your system delays until life becomes worth engaging again. Wow. So there was a very key point here. Let me just see if I can find it. It says procrastination is the data point showing that the current version of life has expired, and that the self requires a more advanced narrative, one that reawakens urgency because it reawakens purpose. So that man who called in that talk show and was saying like I don't feel good enough, it's because his environment, you know, did not was had not awakened his purpose. What does that mean? I think that human psychology makes decisions in accordance to a rewarding mechanism. Of course, deep in human psychology, there's reward and punishment, right? And so, if we do not feel that we can attain a reward, ourselves, we perhaps punish ourselves. So, in some sense, sometimes if you feel you can't attain something, simultaneously the mind's like, yo, man, if I'm not being rewarded, am I being punished? And subconsciously, it could be punishing itself. Now, I've asked AI to share like different angles and arguments in regards to um, parallels and debates on procrastination. So I'm going to read this as well and finish up the research component. It seems like nobody procrastinates. It's not that many viewers today. One, procrastination as emotion regulation, in brackets, not time management. Core academic discussion. A major modern position is that procrastination is primarily about short term mood repair. Avoiding a task reduces discomfort now, for example, stress and self doubt, even if it increases long term cost. This parallels addiction like reinforcement loops, short term relief conditions, avoidance. The procrastination behavior becomes a learned emotional escape mechanism. It says boredom itself is an unpleasant emotion. If your life feels boring or meaningless, avoidance becomes a default method to escape the emotional dullness, often via digital stimulation. So guys, this really explains it. Okay, explains the title. Okay, that if a person feels that, let's say you're bored, okay, and boredom is an unpleasant emotion to you, right? So imagine you're living a life where your self narrative is boring, okay, or meaningless, right? So then you subconsciously, okay, want to avoid that feeling. Right now, if you avoid, I think there's two ways to handle that feeling, the feeling of boredom. Either you find something you're fascinated by, okay, or you just avoid it. You avoid everything because you're bored. Do you know? This falls true because there's been certain relationships I've been in, and just psychologically I got bored. I was in a relationship once, and I'm like, yo, man, this is looping, like our conversations and everything. And it's like, the reality of the individual only could come up to a certain range, and then it looped after that, right? So I guess from this perspective, you know, it's an emotional problem. Okay, the reason is emotional that you procrastinate. Then it goes to self determination theory, autonomy, competence, relatedness. It says core academic discussion. Motivation is strongest when there's autonomy. For example, you say, I choose this. Competence, I can grow at this. Relatedness, I feel connected doing this. What's the parallel? This shows up in education research. Students procrastinate more when learning feels controlling, pointless, or disconnected. If your life lacks these three nutrients, procrastination becomes the predictable outcome. It's not moral failure, it's a motivational environment problem. Yeah, I mean honestly, you know, there has to be room for growth. Anytime I've become fascinated by something, I've become ridiculously motivated to go see what that is. And it's because, in some sense, one, it's autonomous because I saw it. I'm competent because I can know it, right? And I relate to it because it's real, right? Like it feels, how do I say it? It's like, like when I sit down to give these talks, it's there's something about them that's motivating me in regards to, like, okay, if the world is more unknown than known, that unknown will amplify and advance the known. Like the motivation is there based on the amount of, let's say, the reward that you can get, right? So for example, in this YouTube channel, in 2014, when the name Mr. Within's gift came, and I was like, all right, I'll be that, first human being in history called Mr. Within, calling himself Mr. Within, using this alias. and and in some sense, when I said 10,000 talks for the betterment of mankind, that sentence, just, it was there in my mind from the beginning. The thing that motivates me is like, yo, who will I be after these 10,000 talks? What would it feel like? And when I came to give these talks, I discovered that the advancement of humanity, I am someone so fascinated by how advanced we can be, because the system admin is positioned us that can live ahead of the moment. We don't have flying cars, but we can fathom them. And the motivation of how would it feel, like, no longer just parking your car in the air and having like some sort of jetpack shoes, and just like, you know floating down from your car's just up in the air. All parking spots are vertical then. you know so I guess the return has to be more, and it has to feel like accessible to the individual. Go to three, expectancy value models. Value determines action. Core academic discussion. In expectancy value theory, people act believe: one, the task is valuable, and two, and they can succeed. Parallel, this is used in organizational behavior. Employees procrastinate when goals feel low value or when success isn't rewarded meaningfully. If life feels low value, flat, repetitive, purposeless, the in quotations value signal drops across tasks, which can create global procrastination. Yeah, I mean, think of it this way. You have people in companies, right? They say this, that in any job interview, of course, most people know this, but in any job, you the one question that you have to ask, okay, that kind of sets the frame of how you'll be engaged in that job, right, is to ask, is there room for growth here? Like, what does my growth look like here? Do you know? And so it's as if like an individual going into an institution or organization they want to work for, and they're like, okay, what is the development range? Can I advance in this moment or can I not? Right. And I think human beings, when they make decisions just for the sake of survival, which is not advancement, it's just maintenance of how advanced you are so far, then in some sense life becomes meaningless. Human beings need greater purpose. And I realized this very early on, guys, because I realized our purposes are being based on our individual inner lives. But in an advanced civilization, your purpose is the greatness of your civilization, not just the greatness of you. Right? So if you look at the average person, they care for maybe 3 generations of their family, right? They're not caring for the world their great grandkids will live in. They're not caring for, what kind of how their great grandkids are going to be developed in the world, and I think this is very important to consider. Yo, welcome, guys. All right. So welcome, guys. Always appreciate the live viewers. Something I think that's a cool fact is that these talks will outlive me when it's live. Like, you can interact and I can reply to questions and whatnot. My lifespan, is, let's say, the average lifespan 75 to 100. After that, it's like this army of my past selves will just be marching in towards the future. You know. They're like, yo, man, this guy's acting like a general, like this soul that landed on Earth, didn't have an army, and was too introverted to find one. So in some sense, created all this past selves as an army. And imagine on my last breath, I just, to me, I'll be like, my talks go forth, and I'm dismissed out of the realm. So, guys, I'm going to continue with the research. This research was a bit long. I should have probably asked it to be shorter, but it's important. We're looking at this idea of procrastination, okay? And feel free to share your views on this. When you realize there's more unknown than known, you become fascinated to quickly find out what you don't know, or find out how many different ways there are to see something. Then just keep yourself in one way of looking at things. You know, this has been a guiding principle in my life, and it has made life way more exciting. Because on some level, my response to procrastination was to just find a new value. That means if I look at something and it doesn't have value, let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody meets someone, right, and she's like, something about her turns, like, like turns you off, like you in some sense stop feeling like a purpose to go towards this girl you're seeing, right? But that is on some level, like, it is your responsibility to try to see who that person is from different angles, and then you might suddenly realize that the value you impose in the other is not just a fixed value from one viewpoint. So purpose can arise when you look at things differently, folks. Don't forget that. If you feel purposeless, try to look at things differently. There's if you look at the structure of human thought, we there's a concept and there's a context. Think of the concept as the center of the circle. Think of the context as the circumference of the circle. Okay? The circumference is needed for the concept to be the center of the circle, right? So in life, you could and think of the center of the circle and the context, the circumference being equivalent to the concept is yourself, the context is your world. This self can has, let's say, 360 angles, like different ways to engage its context. So you can look at the context differently and realign your purpose. You can treat your concept differently. Human beings tend to function in they're conditioned to function in one context, one fixed context, and they concept hop. So they hop into different concepts of themselves. But when you realize concept shifting is possible, realize that sometimes you don't need to change yourself, you need to change the world that it has led to that self. By noticing something different about the nature of the context, the concept can evolve. And okay, now let's go to the next one. It says temporal discounting and present bias. Academic discussion. This is the fourth point. A core academic discussion. Humans tend to overvalue immediate reward and undervalue future reward. Procrastination grows when future benefits feel abstract. This parallels in economics and behavioral science. The same bias explains overspending, unhealthy eating, etc. If the future feels uninspiring or empty, it becomes even easier to discount. A person who can't, in quotations, feel a compelling future loses urgency today. And guys, there is a truth to this. Let me tell you why. For me, the like these talks, one of those things I haven't procrastinated in, that's been consistent in my life to some degree, do you know, is because I consider the value of the result more than the value of, like, yo, man, it's like, yo, how would it feel if I become that human being in history that has given 10,000 talks and I like advance the human archive, of understanding or something. So for me, this makes a lot of sense that sometimes if we overvalue what is in our present and we undervalue what could be in our future, we procrastinate. That means a sign of procrastination is that you've made your present self narrative more important than the potential of who you will be, even beyond the narrative or in a new narrative in the future. Right? So now we go to 5. It says executive function, ADHD like task initiation problems, core academic discussion. Sometimes procrastination is a cognitive initiation issue. Planning, switching, starting, sustaining attention. Parallel clinical research, executive dysfunction can look like boredom, but it's more about wiring and attention regulation. This challenges the claim some people procrastinate even when they love life because initiation is hard. Yeah, it could be that something is hard, to initiate, right? For me, I noticed that maybe this is common for, many other young men. When I was young, right, to me, as an introvert and a shy person who didn't like himself, so it was very hard to, like being himself around others, you know, or like others even, truly. Um, it was as if that to go and initiate something seemed way more daunting. But when that thing initiated on its own, everything else was very simplified. And I think this is something maybe women can understand about men. I mean, not at some point you snap out of it and realize that, okay, nobody knows who others are. Like at some point when you realize nobody has your inner realms, I think that's when a human being's self-esteem activates, because you realize that what you see is unique to your and your perspective, right? So you're the only one who can see what's behind your eyes to be responsible for it in a matter of sense, right? So if you perceive something, then you can go and actualize it because you're the only one who can actualize it. But but before you realize this, I would say that before you realize this, I would say that it's if something, like for me personally, when situationally, a moment would initiate, everything else was more, how do I say it, everything else was easier, right? But then there is an explanation that, the fear. I read it at the beginning. Let me read it. It was in the research component. It says that let me find it. It says, it says the present emotional relief of avoidance outweighs. Oh, sorry, no, no, not that. It says for perfectionism, where starting feels dangerous because it risks proving one's limits. That means, in some sense, let's say you as a human being are functioning under, let's say, a coherent sense of self or self narrative. That means every person, every human psychology pretty much works like this, that our consciousness to this massive unknown world provides us with instability and uncertainty, in regards to the massive, like, let's say, loads of information that we have or have not processed yet, but are aware that it's right. So in some sense, the strategy of a human being is to maintain a coherent self across all the conditions of their life, right? So when they maintain that coherent self, it's an identity with a subjective self value. Now, if you feel that subjective self value is threatened, you may not initiate. That's the problem, because that subjective self value is fictional. That means many human beings, due to their fictional identity, deny the growth of identity in the non-fictional outer realms. And when I say fictional, that it's think subjective and objective. A subjective is not fictional in regards to. So if I can visualize an apple behind my eyes, and it's an apple, it's a real apple, it's the form of a real apple, and I can see an apple in front of my eyes, but it's fictional in the sense that I cannot grab that apple, I cannot into it, I cannot, like, do you know what I mean? It's not tangible in that sense. So then we go to, oh, sorry, something else to read here. Okay, I'll read this again. So it says executive function, ADHD like task initiation problems, core academic discussion. Sometimes procrastination is a cognitive initiation issue, planning, switching, starting, sustaining attention, parallel, clinical research. Executive dysfunction can look like boredom, but it's more about writing and attention regulation. This challenges the claim some people procrastinate even when they love life because initiation is hard. It says bored with life is not always the cause. Sometimes it's cognitive overload or executive limits. The feeling may be boredom, but the mechanism may be executive function, right? We go to 6, existential psychology, boredom as meaning crisis. Core academic discussion. Existential traditions treat boredom as a signal of meaninglessness, alienation, or a lack of authentic engagement. Its parallels. Philosophical parallels include boredom as a symptom of modernity, in brackets, repetition, loss of sacred meaning. It could be it says second, alienation in industrial, post-industrial life. If boredom is meaning starvation, then procrastination is what happens when the organism refuses to feed on meaningless tasks. Okay, this is a very interesting view. That means you procrastinate because it's meaningless. And it says new living becomes meaning reconstruction, new values, new commitments, new narrative. So something feels meaningless because you're, let's say, looping in a unfulfilling narrative, right? And if you change the narrative through context shift or concept shift, you know, I guess you got to find meaning. I've seen people who like change, like I've heard this, they say that of course I'm not married, I don't have kids yet, you know, God willing it happens soon. But I've heard that when you hold your child for the first time as a father, you transform. You become a different man. Do you know what that means? And the honest answer is it's because something very important has entered your moment of awareness, right? Somebody in the chat section says was bored, not tired, procrastinating, being they say it's like I wasn't looking to the future when I was younger, just riding the wave because time didn't matter. Hey man, me too. Do you know this? It was only through, like, through many things in my life I procrastinated because I didn't even understand their value. But these talks like this, I see it now as a blessing, because in 2014 I managed to add a new narrative to myself. Okay, it was the narrative of like, yo man, how would people respond to like some dude calling himself Mr. Within and talking about how there is an inner life this whole time to the human race? And if we can't in some sense organize and advance behind our eyes, how in some sense can we advance in front of our eyes? And the advancement behind our eyes means that we cannot avoid what's in the outer realms, it's like yeah, I guess something like that. Guys, we're almost done with the research component. This is research component was long. We go to the seventh point. It says global versus local procrastination. This matters. A strong academic way to make your claim rigorous is to distinguish local procrastination. In quotations, I delay this task. Causes fear, difficulty, under perfectionism, low skills, over being overwhelmed. It says global procrastination is, in quotations, I delay life. Causes meaning crisis, low vitality, depression, identity conflict, unstimulating environment, no compelling future. Your claim is strongest when you're clearly talking about global procrastination. Yeah, do you know what this means? I said it. Local procrastination is it's the conceptual view. Global procrastination is the contextual view. If you feel the context is meaningless, you don't activate as a self. If you feel the concept is meaningless, you don't engage the context. Okay, guys, that means if you feel yourself is meaningless, you in some sense, the context, the world is like meaningless also, not worth it. You delay actually getting to know this world while you're here, you know. And if the world is meaningless, you delay changing yourself to see it in a different way, right? So it's saying that, think of it in the sense of global procrastination, which means that from the view that your interpretation on the world could be an error. It concludes by saying procrastination is often emotion regulation, but when it becomes chronic and global, it can be a sign of low meaning, identity misalignment, and a life structure that no longer rewards engagement. So, guys, I'm done with the research component. Now you get to hear yours truly speak, you know, purely from his inner realms. Yeah. So, what is this? What is the whole deal here? I have examples from my own life I can share. And I learned something here by reading this, by the way. So, in my own life, I have procrastinated marriage. I have procrastinated going and giving talks in public in front of millions of people, but I have not procrastinated recording talks, behind the, hidden behind the screen. Now, granted, there was this poet that years ago said, "Give a man a mask and he will tell you the truth." I do understand the sort of safety of my own identity. Like, it's way more comfortable, being able to, like, mute in the middle of a lecture if I have to cough, or, you know, not to be worried about my attention going to my appearance or how my facial gestures appeared, when I'm like giving the talk. Do you know what I mean? So it to me, it's like in a private room, it's easier to express oneself, you know. But why have I procrastinated talking in front of millions of people? Maybe because I don't feel, maybe subconsciously, due to my massive introversion and, sort of, I guess, childhood subtler trauma. People have worse traumas in their childhood, but due to my subtler trauma in my childhood, I was not, I like, because of how many moments I've been more an observer than a participant. My feelings of saying something unseen as an unseen person is way more comfortable to me than being seen and saying it, right? Because if I am in the presence of others, I guess I cannot avoid how I have performed in front of others in my youth. Those memories are still there, right? But of course, I'm gonna, like, the whole point of this is to become conscious. There's this saying in psychology that they say, when you become conscious and you understand your trauma, you become released by your trauma. And a majority of human beings, it's not that they are messed up, it's that they need to take the spotlight of their attention and realize that in certain moments in their youth they lived unconsciously, and because it was unconscious, the subconscious is still acting in accordance to it. But when you bring something that is a subconscious program from your past, into your consciousness now, you link that memory to who you are now. So you shift the emotion of who you were in that memory. Do you know? I don't know if that, I think I explained that well, but you know. I really looked into self sabotage, various psychological, I guess, ailments of our modern time. For me, the advancement of humanity means we need to live an advanced life behind our eyes, and we need to live a advanced life in front of our eyes. And the inner realms and outer realms, as this, as a poet once said, they didn't say about the inner realms and outer realms. They were talking about good and evil, but I will say they were using that duality. I'm using a different duality in regards to the inner realms and outer realms. They're like the wings of a bird. And the most advanced humans are those that the wings of the bird must be synchronized in order for flight to occur. Excuse me. So the most advanced human beings among us, are those who their inner lives and their outer lives are synchronized like the wings of a bird. And I personally, even though I'm Persian, and most Persian kids are raised, identifying as lions, their pride, their sense of pride and honor is lionized. You know, the old Persian flag had a lion in it and a sun. You know, but I identify more as an eagle. To me, the eagle is the king of the sky, and is letting the lion be the king of the land. And when I say eagle, what do I mean? I'm not talking about nationalism here, guys. Any nation can, identify with any animal. You know what I mean? In the same way, any human being can have any behavior. But the eagle has an advantage the lion doesn't. You know, the eagle has access to insight. The eagle can land on a branch or could sit on the ground, and it can fly into the sky, see the whole forest, and see all the blind spots of the lion. And there are these, this is my favorite bird. It's called the pelican falcon, right? Which at 50 miles per hour, just like a missile, like hits its prey and like just kills it. You know what I mean? The eagle is like the king of speed. The lion is the king of strength. Those on the land. So in some sense, even the study of alpha psychology is circumstantial. You know, but on some level, I believe the alpha of this world is not a physical entity. It is the higher power. I consider that we're in a system, in an administered system beyond the world room, and I do not equate the unconditional to the conditional. I find that, as I said early in the talk, that everything arises from an unconditional moment. We are living conditional lives in the presence of an unconditional moment. If we have an awareness beyond their conditions, we notice the unconditional nature of the how the system has been administered before it has happened. Technically, this would mean for the system admin, for an unconditional being, it has access to all conditions at the same time. For a conditional being, it's going through a chronological, like, A to B to C to D, kind of life, right? So from the perspective of the system admin of this world room, the world host, everything has happened already. Every manageable possible condition is the awareness, and then the conditions are there. Was the original unconditional awareness of the moment, and then the conditions arose in it. Okay. Of course, as human beings, what are we, yo? We're conditional beings. That means God in theology is perceived as a being that creates conditions. That means conditions adjust to the will of absolute unconditional being, okay, or presence of power. But we human beings, we adjust to the conditions. We have to adapt to the conditions. Our bodies have adapted to the conditions. But as time has gone forth, we've managed to separate our inner realms with the outer realms and treat the world more unconditionally. This is why I can imagine myself flying in the sky, but I can't do it actually. I could imagine myself talking in front of millions of people. When I started these Mr. Within talks in 2014, it was in this place called Curzon Gateway, this accommodation area in Birmingham, UK. I was studying mechanical engineering there, which was unsuccessful because I became like a philosopher in the middle of that program, you know, after the first year. Guys, you don't know. I hope that moments are logged and people, maybe in other states can truly go back in time and see what sort of a powerhouse and machine I was. I was fasting. I financially, I'd misallocated my resources at the time, and all I would do was wake up, go to the accommodation area, grab a cup of tea. I had these fake Apple headphones, and I had my iPhone 3. I would go sit on this bench sometimes and press record, but there would be times at night when everybody was asleep. I would go in the accommodation area, right? And they had these two benches that didn't have a backrest, so they kind of looked like these two podiums, and I would walk on top of them, and in front of me there was this giant grass field, and my mind would playfully assume every straw of grass was like an audience member, and I felt I was talking in my inner realms. I was talking in front of millions, but I was just talking, to an empty grass field and recording the talks. So the mind has an ability to access moments that are not limited to the fixed conditions we find in the outer realms. So don't avoid, whoever you are, don't avoid your inner life. And you might not believe it, your inner life activates when you are content, when you accept it is unknown. Your outer life activates in regards to a solidification approach, where you are like, okay, I am this, I accept I am this, and then reality aligns to the role you choose, you know and we human beings, a majority of the our lives, what are they based on? They're not just based on our feelings, they're based on how our, let's say, emotion and energy
like liquid fall into the mold of a role in society, right? And most people, their roles are given from outside of them. For example, me, the only area of my life where I gave a role that was not outside of culture was these Mr. Within talks. Do you see? This is why it's, to me, it feels like, very different. It feels like I in some sense started living in a role that was new. It wasn't the traditional role. So the value of what I could attain by living through that role was different as well. Anyways, and of course, like, I can see it. I've procrastinated getting married, because I fear what kind of father I would be. Because I have fears of, like, could my mind scare my wife. This, and people might think this is ridiculous, but you might not understand. Like, I've had this fear. I've had this fear that I have to constantly filter my mind. You might not get it, but I'm filtering my realities when I speak to you. Do you know? Through the role of being a member of the human species. Like, that's how I present it. You know, of an advanced human species. But in various other areas of my life and in other corners of my psyche, I sometimes have felt that I have accepted my incompetence. And even like studying this now and sharing these research with you guys and reading it myself, I do understand that it's out of a only it's an inner realm justification. Do you know? Because if in the outer realms we don't know what the outcome will be, then why would we procrastinate? So to me, I can say procrastination is a limiting belief of what you think is going to happen, you don't know if that's going to happen. You know, in the same way that I should understand that, I don't know, maybe there's a woman out there who, you know, like, wonders about the mysteries of reality as well. I don't know, like, so what I'm saying is, it goes back to the notion of self narrative, and it doesn't mean that just because a person is healthy in one role, they're healthy in other roles of their life. The mind is very complex. As you even if you look at how the brain works, I'm very grateful. I read this book years ago. This was maybe around 2012, even before the talks. Okay, this psychologist was explaining the nature of human memory, and this psychologist gave an incredible metaphor. Silly, ridiculous, but incredible metaphor. The guy was saying that imagine your brain is like a cube of jello. Okay, a cube of wobbly jello, and every experience you have is like pouring a spoon of hot ink on this jello, just a little bit of hot ink on this jello. When this hot ink falls on this cube of jello, it makes a dent, but it doesn't go to the bottom. It makes a certain dent. If you were to have another experience or pour another teaspoon of ink on that cube of jello, from the previous dents it would redent, I guess. Do you understand? So what does this mean? Every experience you have is sculpting you, and based on how you've been sculpted, the new experiences resculpt through those pathways you've been sculpted, right? But of course, the brain is way more complex than just this. This is just to explain a certain function. In my understanding of human psychology, and especially whoever you are, when you get acquainted with Carl Jung, Carl Jung's genius was, in some sense, even you can say Freud as well helped Carl Jung develop these views. Is that in some sense, what does Carl Jung say? He says if you let the unconscious, um, he says, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This suggests that when a child is being raised in this world, it is developing roles, and it's in some sense getting it. how do I say it? The blank slate is being filled not based on analytical conscious decisions of who I am, but in some sense unconscious recordings of how people treated the child or how the child felt. Okay, and we human beings have to realize that it's not just like if I come and say, hey guys, I'm a perfect person, and that's just in the conscious zone. Think of it as concentric circles, like three concentric circles. Okay, first inner circle is your consciousness, second outer circle is your subconscious, third outer circle is the unconscious. Why do you think I keep saying we're in an unknown world? There's unknown selves at some point in this evolutionary eventhood. This unconscious unknown self became conscious and became conscious of itself, and then developed a referential system in regards to through the development of language, in some sense, to make its reality conscious. Our consciousness is based on, primarily, this is one of my hypotheses, on our ability to reference. It is memory. That means if a person is in one moment, okay, they can't compare that moment with another moment. But if the human being, as it lives through life, develops a memory trail, right? So that means how I feel now is based on a memory of me, of who I was. So that means the moment you have two memories, there comes the referential comparative ability for the subjectification of a different value, right? This also implies that we are like the third factor of reality. That means there's an objective angle, there's a subjective angle, and then there's us noticing the objective subjective angle, also suggesting we're not limited to the objective and subjective angle. Okay, so there is many reasons. I'm pretty much trying to say that when you get introduced to Carl Jung, you see that it could be that your mind unconsciously when you were young, even emotionally, is under roles that is not for it. I'll give you an example. They call this emotional enmeshment. And it's a very key thing in when you raise children. Okay, so there are parents that they in some sense provide physically something amazing for their children, amazing physical life for their children. They even provide an amazing intellectual life for their children, but they don't realize if they're providing an incredible emotional life for their children. Okay, and a majority of, let's say, children raised in developing countries, their parents, of course, due to the intensity of the lives they live, they don't care about the emotional development of the child. You understand? So the child becomes emotionally enmeshed. I'll give you an example. In single parents, okay, let's say you have a single mother or a single father, okay? I'll give you an example of a single mother. The single mother, because women tend to be more emotional. Imagine a single mother, okay, is, has three, like, let's say, couple kids, 3 or 4 kids or something, has to maintain these kids alone, okay, and has to play both the roles of father, the conditional discipliner, and the mother, the unconditional, love provider. Do you know? Now the mother, imagine, is tired, comes home from work, doesn't have an active love life. The single mother comes home, right, and her child, and she's upset and sad. Okay, her child sees this. Her young child sees this and comes there and tries to make his or her mother feel better. Now the mother, she's like, oh, my child, cares for me. Let me share my suffering with my child. I have no one to share it with. That's a huge error. That's a huge error. Okay? Because then the child may unconsciously go into a different emotional role. And the child misses out on actually experiencing its own emotions rather than the parent being like, okay, this is a child. I should not share like the turbulence of my emotional reality with this child. You know what I mean? Because the child, it's time to experience its own emotion. If it reacts to my emotion, it's pushed into a. Do you guys understand this? Do you guys understand how important this is? Emotional development. Okay. I was emotionally enmeshed. Okay. It took me 30 years, 12,500 days to be like, whoa, these emotions I'm feeling are not all from me. The society gave me these emotions. I love my parents to death, but they gave these emotions to me because they did not care to ask how I. So I am telling you guys, if you want to raise kids, you have to on some level be like, all right, tell me why you did this. Tell me what you felt that you did this. Tell me why you feel. I mean, maybe not that complex, but I'm telling you, it's important to make sure that your children can develop an emotional independence. Okay, do you know? And even sometimes their emotions could be wrong. A child, may be emotional and angry, for no reason. Do you know what I mean? And then instead of the parent punishing, reacting to the child's emotion, imagine the child's like, I want candy. And the parent's like, no, candy's bad for you. And the child's, starts crying or something. Do you know what I mean? And starts going into a reactive mode. The parent shouldn't react. The parent should stay quiet, say nothing until the child has calmed down, the ripples of the child's mind is settled, and be like, tell me, what are you feeling right now? And imagine the child's like, I'm angry. You didn't give me candy, And then the parent's like, okay, that's okay. Why do you feel like this? Right? And the child learns not to react when it gets an emotion it doesn't like. It learns to observe, okay, I got this emotion. Why? I got it from not eating candy. Do you know what I mean? And then the parent may explain, it's like, okay, listen, is candy do you like your teeth? And then the child's like, I love my teeth. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, the candy ruins your fat. It's like the child's like, no, I don't want to be fat. you know you know if a child says they want to be fat, be very concerned as a parent. Okay. Their child's like, yo man, I this rapper Fat Joe, I want to be a rapper like Fat Joe. It's like, nah kid, you don't want obesity. So the whole point of it is, instead of having an emotional reactive moment, push the child into a role that is not actually like, them being conscious of how they're feeling. Understanding helps it. Okay. Having a conscious conversation, bringing things into consciousness, that was the whole point of Carl Jung. So I personally, let me share this. I've been in touch with my parents. In Middle Eastern families, you're very close with your parents. But I consciously drew a boundary around myself, and for 1 month, around 1 month and a little bit more, I did not talk to them at all. I told them, I said, I don't want to, I'm drawing a boundary. I don't want to, I need to go and just be in my own space. And I realized that when I was young, my mother, and bless her, she's an angel, but when I was young, my dad kind of, my dad, let's say, put in a little bit less effort than my mother, and I think my mother put in too much of an effort, you know, and my mother would have this attitude of trying to convince me not to do something by making me fear the consequence. And she in some sense was inputting an emotion in me that it's like, when you're around me, like, it's like, and you do this, be afraid. Okay. Okay. Do you know? And and I totally understand, you can't blame the past, because the argument is, they didn't know better. Even whatever the past has done, you can't blame it because it's past and they didn't know better, right? And compared to how her parents raised her, she did an incredible job. Do you know what I mean? And but the issue was that early on, because I loved my mother, I didn't have the ability to notice that I don't need to have the same emotion. I have my own emotions here. And a person who's emotionally enmeshed and cannot actually be like, okay, what do I feel right now? You know, if they can't do that, they are waiting for permission from themselves. They are waiting for emotional advancement from out themselves. You know, sometimes procrastination is like the person maybe subconsciously thinks, man, I can't do things to do it. Do you know what I mean? And people don't realize, for example, in religion, why is repentance a key factor? Repentance means the responsibility, mission to be yourself is authorized when you're not that limited self. You repent that self characteristic. Do you know? How's everyone feeling? How's the talk so far? Is it interesting? You know, feel free to share views, guys. You know, I have blind spots as well. The whole aim is not, and I'm a tyrant of a concept, you know, enforcing a concept at all. It's all about trying to see what we haven't seen yet, you know. Pretty much, I guess, on a psychological level, procrastination is like, imagine there's like, I don't know, like a giant mansion in like Switzerland, okay, and you're in one room of that mansion, okay. Okay, and you imagine life is like a mansion, and your whole life you believe you only deserve what's in that room. Your emotions are just based on that room, your thoughts are based on that room, and the moment you realize there is a door out, consciousness of the unconscious, that's the way you open the door. You know, hey man, I've been functioning under identities because I didn't consciously realize there were other ways to implement myself as a being. You know, and of course, we human beings, I see it that the inner realms are like a sword. Okay, the experiences we have in life is like a hammer, and the world is the anvil. Okay, and we straight we um, uh, clarify our direct relationship with reality with our direct experience. That means, you know, a person has to be very cautious. That of it this way, you, in the same way you look at let's say two people look at a painting, one of them's like, yo, this painting's trash, and the other one's like, yo, this is the most beautiful thing I've seen in my life. You know? Okay, they are giving the meaning. You realize you are the agency that gives meaning to phenomena, and when you realize your inner realms is personal and the outer realms is impersonal, you also require to be responsible as that agent to notice beyond your inner realms. That means just because we give meaning to something in one way doesn't mean that's that meaning. Okay, imagine somebody, you know, does something bad. People are like, what a bad person, man. When I see this person, in my mind says this is a bad person, right? But imagine that person goes on doing incredible things afterwards. And then you're like, wait a minute, I didn't know there was a good person there. I didn't know there was an advanced being there. Do you see? The challenges of us human beings is that our intelligence provides a limited reality, so we don't get overwhelmed by the limitless reality we find ourselves in. I think that's a really good way of saying it, you know. And the limitless reality is unconscious and unknown. The limited reality is conscious and known. And when you realize things can be known in different ways, I guess you're not trapped in just being in one way. So if I'll give you an example. So if I've procrastinated getting married, okay, and of course it's not, there's multiple reasons for that, but it's not just it's not just like internal and, you know, internal based. It's also, you know, financial capability and whatnot. But like logistics and external infrastructure and all that, you know. But I guess the thing I'm trying to say is that I have been sacrificing, or let's say there has been an opportunity cost in trying to maintain who I am now, um, when I could have become someone else. Who knows? Maybe if I was married now, the lectures would have been way more advanced. You know, I'd be giving more lectures on female nature. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make is, who are we waiting for? This sentence always for me. Who am I waiting for? For example, 10,000 talks. Who am I waiting for? I'm waiting for myself. I want to get married. Who am I waiting for? I'm waiting for myself. But the 3 points that in the research component I read, the sort of, what was it? Autonomy, competence, and relatedness, right? And if I can become conscious, okay, you know, you can choose to be with someone, and even though they say the wrong partner can destroy your life, but it's your choice. It's okay to make a wrong choice. Imagine, and in regards to competence, I don't feel I can be a good father. It's like, okay, I don't know yet if I can be a good father or not. you know and then we go to relatedness. Is it going to be, am I going to feel real, or am I going to be forced to just my inner realms and not feel active in my life? Because I'm telling you, hear it from somebody who for many years you know dwelled behind himself, behind his own eyes, as an introvert and shy person, that uh it's a different value. To participate in your life is very liberating. To just observe your life later on can be liberating, but at the moment is not liberating. Some human beings, they are more observers than participants, and some human beings are more participants than observers, based on, I guess, their programming, you know and the way energy works. All right, any questions, folks? I'm usually such a good speaker that nobody asks questions. Like, yo, man, this guy explains his explanations. Anyways, my conclusion from this lecture: I have convinced myself of roles that I don't know their true future. I it is important to put an effort to make conscious behaviors that can't be explained from the present. You know, for example, I'll give you an example. For me, even, I mean, aside from procrastination, I've always had some sort of endless endurance vibe. But I would say that for me personally, like something huge, of sabotage. I would sabotage myself when good things were happening, right? Or the thing I wanted was happening, and then I realized, oh man, I've a part of me believes I don't deserve good things. For example, smoke cigarettes, maybe some part of me feels I don't deserve to be healthy. Or I've done too much damage, it's irreversible or something. You know what I mean? Or in other areas, it's so I guess be very cautious as a human being, how your self narrative can either liberate your life or it can inhibit your life, right? So wonder about what sort of character you're in a story, and if the character you want to be in the story is important to you than the character you are now. If who you are now is more important than who you want to be, then why change? For me, I understand this was a very profound understanding. I received this understanding through a sort of Islamic theological lens. In Islam, there's this idea shared, okay, that if you live for the past, you have problems. If you live for the present, future is going to have problems in this life. And vice versa. Like, if you live for the present, you can stabilize your past. If you live for the you can stabilize your present. Okay, now how do you stabilize the future? For religious people, you live for the afterlife, and then your future stabilizes. Even in religion, it is like those who live for the next world, all their affairs in this world is orchestrated by the higher power. This is an Islamic view. Okay, this is a religious view. Because religion is, many people disregard how fascinating it is, even more fascinating than alien contact, contacting time travelers, contacting advanced super AI, is to contact the author of the novel we're all living in. Okay? Character, you think you can see what the author looks like? No. The author is beyond the conditions of the story you're in. Okay? So, living for the future, and they've convinced people, this is why a part of me went to, I started disagreeing. You'll see it in my talks. I started this, something about non-duality felt off. Okay, why it felt off? Because it wasn't a solution, it was an escapism. It's easier when you don't identify as a self, to not feel the suffering of that self. It's a sort of numbing, due to an avoidance of the responsibility of being a psychological entity. You know, responsibility is not in the outer realms. In the inner realms is to become conscious and to give yourself the patience to process the information you have access to. As someone, and most kids, even I myself, I was very reactive. And especially introverts and shy people, they're super reactive because they're not familiar with, I guess, emotions or things from outside of them programming them. But introverts, to me, are also blessed because they buy the cultural programming, because they can't fit into that culture. So that in years later, they're going to understand, yo, man, I was lucky I didn't fit in and have that were just because, people thought, ooh, like, do you know what I mean? There's, I think, ultimately, be grateful for whatever life you have lived, because it, you can see now. My strategy is, to make my lifetime efficient, and it's honestly been like this. Growing, this is what growing up to me and being responsible is, in regard as a mind. Okay, you acknowledge the values from the past. You acknowledge your value in the present, and how through free will you can choose your value. Even though we don't have free will in to the options we're given, but we do have a sort of multiple choice free will. We don't get to choose the options, but we get to choose an option. You know, we don't get to choose what the options are, but we get to choose an option out of them. To activate our life, or enhance, or advance our life through. And guys, I feel like going into another research component. I'm gonna go into quotes. I used this thing in 2023. Sorry, not 2023, 2020s. I get maybe from 2018 up to the 2000 early 20s. There's this. I'm gonna read quotes what other famous people or other people have said about this. This is from quotes. Great website. Okay, Wayne Gretzky, a Canadian champion. Procrastination is one of the most common and deadliest of diseases, and its toll on success and happiness is heavy. Philip Stanhope, 4th Earl of Chesterfield. Yo. Know the true value of time. Snatch, seize, and enjoy every moment of it. No idleness, no laziness, no procrastination. Never put off till tomorrow what you can do today. Edward Young, procrastination is the thief of time. That's a very nice quote. Don Marquis, procrastination is the art of keeping up with yesterday. Victor Kiam, procrastination is an opportunities assassin. Wow, that is true. I firmly agree with that. Mason Cooley, procrastination makes easy things hard, hard things harder. Yeah, of course, because we human beings are conditioned to, like, as a child is growing up, they're conditioned for the responsibility of their life force to be with their parents, for example. Do you know? And that is important. I'm not saying like grow too quickly or become grow up as an adult too quickly, because then you're going to reminisce your childhood. So don't, everything has its time and place. But it is true that, when we delay responsibility or using our life force or implementing our life force to the moment, it makes the moment harder. Imagine somebody eats food and they don't clean the dishes right after, right? You're gonna have piles of dishes. It's the task of cleaning dishes. It's gonna be like, yo, man, I gotta clean every dish in my home at once. And a person suffers until they buy a washing machine. Like, sorry, dishwasher machine. They're like, yo, man, I put my plates in the washing machine, but they've all, turned and been grinded into dust, and I don't have a washing machine anymore. So, guys, don't put your dishes in the washing machine. Make sure you put it in the dishwasher. You know, we go to, let's find some interesting. Denzel Washington. Denzel Washington says, I'd be more frightened by not using whatever abilities I'd been given. I'd be more frightened by procrastination and laziness. Yeah, think of it this way. Procrastination is all your past selves being like, we don't know about this. And your present self should be like, I got this, guys. Just look at all your past selves and be like, watch this. We have Christopher Parker says procrastination is like a credit card. It's a lot of fun until you get the bill. Okay, let's find some names I can recognize. Okay, Thomas D. Quincy. Okay, no, this quote is okay, I don't recognize. But I've heard that name before, but I don't know who that is. Let's say, what do we have here? Yo, not a lot of famous names have talked about procrastination. Or let's say, to my mind. Oh my God, there's a Bill Cosby quote on procrastination. Okay, let's not. That's that for law. God forgive us. Um, Richard Herring. For me, genius is 1% inspiration and 9%, 99% procrastination. Okay, let me look up procrastinating. Maybe. Okay, here. Jen Sincero. Perfectionism and procrastination have such a fine line. You say in quotations, well, I want it to be good. I want it to be perfect. But what you're really doing is not doing your work. You're putting off showing up and being visible because then you're going to be judged and it might suck. Yeah. Gavin Newsom. I've never been a fan of pretense or procrastination. After all, our state is defined by its independent, outspoken spirit. John Rampton, procrastination doesn't work for everything. For instance, waiting to buy a plane ticket at the last minute will typically end up costing you more. Yeah, guys, I think they say the best time to buy a ticket is the cheapest time to buy a ticket is 70 days before your flight. Napoleon Hill says procrastination. No, I read this. Adam Grant, I guess, says a positive view is that procrastination gives you time to consider divergent ideas, to think in nonlinear ways, to make unexpected leaps. I wouldn't say that's procrastination. I would say patience does that. If procrastination is you're conscious during the procrastination, patiently, I guess, makes sense. Ruby D says, my constant battle is putting aside time wasters, and I have to watch out for procrastination. Staying on the path of something you're trying to create has much to do with having confidence in yourself and in your capacity to realize the things you want out of life. Jay Shetty, guys, I met this person, Jay Shetty. Okay, I met him at a York University event. Um, and this guy at the time was like this disciple of this guy named Radhanath Swami, if I remember correctly. So Radhanath Swami had come to that event in York University, and Jay Shetty was like his young disciple, and he was interviewing us after the event. And then later on, the guy popped on YouTube. Very interesting. Somebody in the chat section says I'm finishing the laundry today because if I did it all, I wouldn't have anything to do tomorrow. You know what this reminds me of? One day, my father came up to me, right? And I was like, Dad, I've achieved like inner peace. This was in 2011, 11 to 12. That's when I had a very huge shift in who I was. And I was living like a Tibetan Buddhist. I told everybody in my family I was a Tibetan Buddhist, like very, you don't understand. I legit was living like a Buddhist. Okay. I remember I told my dad, Dad, I feel like I've attained some sort of inner peace. He came up to me and he said, okay, son, that's because you don't have enough problems. He said, like, he was telling me that a person can suffer by not having enough problems, you know? And you know what I find interesting? I make this point. If you have like a Buddhist who believes in reincarnation and past lives in this world room, if a Buddhist goes and asks a Muslim, okay, and my father believes in past lives, by the way, guys, in this world. But if a Buddhist was to go, like, my views are very different than my father, but he believes reality is an infinite school. I believe it's like a house party where you need to find the host and you're liberated from the room. Okay. But my father was the idea my father was sharing was very correct in the sense that he was saying, sorry, I was talking about Islam and Buddha. If a Buddhist goes to a Muslim and says, hey, Muslim, who were you in a past life? People think the Muslim doesn't have an answer, but the Muslim has an answer. But the answer is not in this life. The answer is, this is Muslim metaphysics and theology, that before the soul entered the womb, which I think is like 2-3 weeks, I don't remember the exact day, in accordance to Islamic theology. But before the soul enters this world in life, the Muslim view is that all souls are in this realm called Alam al-Arwah, which means the world of souls. In Islam, there's other realms as well. Alam al-Malakut, the realm of angels, the realm of those beings near to God to the degree that they don't need to have free will. They are the divine will. You know, Contrary to popular belief, as you go up the higher planes, it is the responsibility of everything is realized to be the original being. So think of it this way: the closer you are to God, you are living as an original. The closer everything is original, the further away from this original unconditional moment that everything arises from, you're more simulated. But inevitably, all simulated conditions return back to that unconditional state. Okay. So in Alam al Arwah, the world of souls, not on earth, souls have a rank. In a hadith, the Prophet explains, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, explains that in Alam al Arwah, souls have a rank. And souls of the same rank in this life get along, and souls of a different rank, they don't get along. Sometimes souls are positioned in places where they outrank the rank of their environment, and sometimes souls are positioned in moments where they underrank. The environment outranks them. Now, the notion is your rank only increases through the system admin's will, suggesting the way out of this simulation is not you go type in a passcode of sacred geometry or something and you transcend beyond this dimension. It is that you establish a relationship with the host, the unconditional host. If you're Christian, you're starting with a conditional host, the God the Son, and then a lesser conditional host, God the Holy Spirit, and then the final unconditional host, God the Father. Now, of course, they're in Christian theology, they do have the view that the Trinity was the original rather than a singular point. But I believe it's a singular point. Everything started from a singular unconditional moment. In the same way you put a seed in a soil, you know, but it can't be humanized or conditionalized. That means I can discuss what's in the world room. Beyond the world room, we use what's in the world room to explain it, but still it doesn't satisfy what's actually beyond the world room. So, what's the point of me saying that Olam al Arba? It means that in the same way, you might procrastinate if you don't, how do I say it? If something is, you feel underranked, or if you feel overranked, it can lead to that, you know, like why, I don't know, there, I guess there's, let me see how I can organize my thoughts here. Um, yeah. The value of the self in regards to its conditional position and unconditional position, and how if a soul is overranked for their reality, they will, I guess, competence is how they have a more unconditional experience of it. Of course, I don't want to dive in too deep into the metaphysics. Why? Because the unseen is in the jurisdiction of the system admin. In Islam, the soul is considered. There's a verse in the Holy Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It says, the soul is the amr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means it is the command of the one and only system admin, and man knows but little, meaning that it is Mysterian. Mysterian means it cannot be known fully. Do you know? It cannot be known fully from here, right? My hypothesis, I guess, is, I mean, I'm going into the unseen actually. Let me pause here. So, anyways, folks, wonder about how procrastination could be that you're living in the wrong, not in the long parallel universe, you're living internally in the wrong storyline, aka parallel universe, right? So in our mind, in just having an ability to have different roles, imagine you go and work as a chef, you go and work as a, I don't know, IT guy. It's as if these are different realities, different conditions, different self narratives, right? And it's up to you. For me, I've reached this point in my life where if somebody says, "Hey, man, are you your self narrative?" I would say I am. I identify as an unknown moment, as an unknown life force, as an unknown force interacting with an unknown moment, and then conditions are passing through my awareness, so I can choose to identify with those conditions. Because there is this thing that, if you like, think of it this way. This is a very cool argument I can make here. Actually, imagine you get bored of being in control of your life. I think this can happen. Okay, you can get bored of being in control. Right? So in that sense, right, because you're in control of life, you can't lie to yourself that there is a self that is in control. Okay, that control is an identification with a specific self's ability, right? So for me, I've often said it in these talks, even before this lecture, that guys, I'm kind of bored with existence. That's why I'm looking so deeply at it, do you know? But I've come to understand that it's very fascinating because it is real for me that we are in an administered system. This to me is a commanded universe. So in other words, we are functioning inside a commanded simulated existential system. It is also simultaneously a simulated testing zone and a divine surveillance state. Because it's a divine surveillance state, it means the ultimate justifier of movement is not the human will, right? So because I've noticed something more than just my human will here, I am fascinated to see how, if I enter a moment as an unknown, like, how do I tell you, like, if before certain moments would get me angry, like I would talk to someone and I would get angry, and I would just be like, yo man, you said that to me, let me say this to you, you know? And now I have this approach that even if somebody comes and says something bad, I don't know who they are and I'm unknown. Who are they saying it to? They are saying it to their limited impression of me based on few instances of seeing me. You know what I mean? And we beings are much deeper than we can see. So we need to consider that. Anyways, folks, this was a 2-hour lecture, but it felt to me like an hour 15. Anyways, thank you for listening. Um, and I got to say one thing about an advanced civilization. One thing I've noticed about myself, okay? And you can choose to give me a time traveler's ego, see me having a time traveler's ego, but I will say, for me, at before a vision throughout the years of giving these talks. You guys don't see behind the scenes, okay? But before I give these talks, sometimes they're even triggered by the music I hear. I have this feeling that there is something important in the future, and I feel an urgency. I don't know how to explain to you. If you ever in these talks feel like there's some force behind what I'm saying, it's because a part of me, I think, has maybe even subconsciously, even though I can explain it consciously, but maybe deeper subconsciously, has a sense of where things are heading. Therefore, in some sense, it is also responding to that. For me, I identified with the self narrative that I'm a member of the human species, considering the 300,000, let's say, range of civilization. It's estimated for there to be 117 billion human beings. Okay. And we are the original natural human beings, even though we've entered a sort of semi cyborg of an object subject age, And for me, my, I guess the thing that I have chosen to serve is, one, the advanced power; two, the most advanced expression of that power, which is the most advanced human civilization. For me, in my inner realms, I have seen the advanced communicators and the pilots of consciousness who will land here. You know, I have, in some sense, understood that the potentials of human greatness are accessible in the inner realms, they're visible. So, in some sense, if you're procrastinating, um, because you're thinking that you're just you and you have a local definition of yourself, expand the scale, expand the context. Today we are nationalistic, and we are like first personal inner realm entities, then nationalistic entities. But in the future, you will realize you are a member of the human species, and then you realize you are a member of this planet. The species is a member species of this planet. So we, in some sense, our identities are outdated. We're still identifying with our personal inner realms. We're only identifying with our local, let's say, nationalistic provided identities, from outside of us epigenetically. So on some level, right, it depends on your role, right, and the narrative you say. The narrative I say to myself is that I'm a temporary member of the human species alive here, and what's the coolest thing that can happen here? I'm a soul in search of the most advanced state. The most advanced state I've realized is an original unconditional causal power. I'm a conditional effect, but for that conditional effect, the most advanced is the advancement of mankind, then the advancement of earth kind. In the future, we will stop eating animals, and we were in some sense awaken them from their slumber, whether through AI, making up for their gap in their evolutionary advancement, like because human beings are considered to have a prefrontal cortex that provides them with this sophisticated awareness that we have, you know a very complicated development of prefrontal cortex, right? Now, if other animals don't have it, I don't see how in the future we can't connect like chips to their brain, and that animal will in some sense will realize that, okay, at least if you were yogic, you don't see animals as animals, they're souls, right? But if you're somebody who, let's say, is not yogic, they are just the slumbering species that have not evolved yet, and they will have different capabilities in the future. That means sometimes it fascinates me that they say it was we evolved from the Neanderthals and some other ancestor we don't know. Okay, some other type of being that we don't know. Okay, but to me, how do I explain it? There's been days where I was like, what if we were lions? And what if right now we had giant lion heads, right? And we all were wearing suits and standing on two legs, but we had the body of a lion. Do you know what I mean? Right? Or what if like penguins became conscious and they opened up the most next level nightclub wearing tuxedos and whatnot? Do you know what I mean? So we can have the ability to see that other species will awaken, you know? Somebody in the chat section said the movie Soul. I've heard of it. I haven't seen it. I'll add it to my bucket list. you know, um, there is this movie called When Bears Discovered Fire or something, or When Bears Stood Up. There's a short film. I remember when I was in film school, I saw it on Vimeo or something. You know, and it was showing how bears were suddenly noticing, becoming conscious. Like the bear looked at the human being like, I see you. Like it was kind of terrifying from a human perspective, because we think that animals do not have like that depth of an understanding. But if you consider these beings to be souls, their solar access cannot be comprehended just from how their format is. In the same way that let's say if you connected, um, let's say to somebody like Elon Musk is doing this, right? Like if you connected I'm against chips entering the human brain, and for the case made for animals in the far future is if they can't have that evolutionary development that fast, right? you know, but where was I going with this? Oh yeah, the chips in the brain, right? So imagine somebody who is incapable in the outer realms, right? They connect the chip in their brain, right? And that person will actually experience virtual reality as themselves. And then you see the guy was an incredible runner, but who couldn't run in the outer realms. Do you know what I mean? So we don't know the potential or the ranks of souls that perhaps are behind animals. But as a Muslim, there is this strange view that the other animals are like NPCs, okay? And once the simulated game is finished, okay, the NPCs turn to dust, okay? But I don't know about this is something I need to look further into. Islam is very fascinating to me because the ideas in it are way beyond a human human conditions. That means when you look at a book that is making claims of the future, like right now, like in my lectures, when I record it on my phone, there's like the logo of the earth there, right? I have people come and say, yo man, is the earth flat? Is the earth around? And excuse me, attention drifted. I'm giving this talk outside, like in my car, guys. Sometimes my attention goes outside and the image I have in my inner realms I'm explaining goes away. but it loops usually like it orbit. I feel like sometimes my inner events, they orbit around me. In a couple minutes it comes back. But I guess the thing I was saying. Okay, let's move on. I guess the thought's gone. Somebody in the chat section says, "Is that why I was going to take a nap?" I don't know exactly what sentence you're referring to, but think of it this way: if you had more work to do, you wouldn't have time for a nap. Do you know? But if you took a nap, consciously, it might also advance the quality of your work. Who knows? Anyways, folks, I'm gonna end it here. I feel like the inner realm events in my like behind my eyes they're concluding. So thank you for listening. Wonder about what procrastination means, and also wonder about what procrastination means to you, and share it in the comment section. I share these talks in the hope that the comment sections will become incredible discussions in the future. So I'd appreciate if people, if you gain something, or not just gained. I mean, like if you feel like you're seeing something I'm not seeing, definitely feel like sharing it in the comment section. Okay, thank you for listening. In the name of God, the most benevolent, the most merciful, and the most advanced, in honor of the original unconditional moment that all simulated conditions have arisen from and will return to. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise due to the Lord of the worlds. And guys, it's plural, worlds. All right, have a great day, guys. And if you're going to take a nap, enjoy your nap, bro. Have a good day, guys. Thank you for listening.